Cuando las serpientes evolucionaron, más rápido que muchos venenos. Note la diferencia entre una serpiente venenosa y otra que no lo es por las marcas que deja.
1970, 1970, 1970, 1970. Nací un día de junio del año 77, planeta Mercurio y el año de la serpiente.
I read the entirety of Don Quixote. As you can see, there's just a couple notes I made in the span of 2.5 months while juggling a full course load as a full-time student. And I'm going to be telling you why and how I read this and I read long books like this, as well as the value that long-form reading can add to your life. The benefit to reading giant books like this is more of a long-term benefit and is something that you feel after a while. Pretty much, reading long books just makes you a more interesting person since you have a lot more to contribute to literally any kind of social conversation. I find it gives me more fulfillment and it makes me happier than scrolling through Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. Consuming content that doesn't really add that much value to my life. With fiction, especially big books like this, you could say that, well, I'm also consuming content and I could just spark note it rather than reading the whole thing cover to cover. Well, to answer the second comment, the big difference is that you get to decide what books you read rather than your teacher. In my AP English class, I remembered more from reading this 1,000-page book than any of the 200 to 300 pages that we read. And there's a simple reason for this because of the motivation I had to read those is very different than the motivation I had to read Don Quixote. Actually, for that same class, for the end of the year AP exams, I actually wrote one of my essays on this book instead of any of the books we read in class. So outside reading, outside of what was recommended because I wanted to read, actually helped me out more than doing what was required in class. And to address the first comment, yes, I actually used a little bit of spark notes and lit charts just to help me out whenever I was confused, but I read this entire book cover to cover still. And the reason is because with fiction, you can't really encompass the entire value you get, the depth of the characters in Spark Notes. Spark Notes works a lot better for nonfiction, I would say, and I use it for nonfiction. And it's a really good tool, but I think that reading the whole thing just immerses yourself in the world so much. And that immersion kind of is that same feeling that you get when playing a new RPG video game, where you're in a new world, you don't have to worry about the troubles of this world. But the difference is this book and many other big books like this often are scattered with different pieces of life advice and just really, really important insights on life that I could spend a whole nother video and write a whole list on just the insights on life from this book. This is also recognized as the first modern novel by many literature professors, and it's pretty much the absolute GOAT of all literature. It is an absolutely amazing read filled with so much humor and deep, profound insights on life. Now, you can find plenty of summaries of this book online, and since I value your time, I'm not going to summarize the book. But overall, I really liked Cervantes' description, his archaic verbiage, and how it ultimately makes you get lost in a fantasy world that's also simultaneously real life. I also really liked how the fourth wall was broken very often in a kind of Deadpool style, where the narrator is actually Cid Hamonte, he's the actual author, he actually speaks to the reader, but then Don Quixote, the book itself, is also published in the second book, and Don Quixote interacts with the book of himself. This is a really, really cool way of telling a story that's not often told. I think that this book is a really, really great metaphor for us aimlessly trying to become our heroes. When I was a kid, for some reason, I really wanted to become an assassin from the Assassin's Creed video game series. I dressed up as one for Halloween. I made my own hidden blades and all that stuff. And now as an adult, I also sometimes struggle between theory and application while I'm studying in university. In the same way that we see Don Quixote struggle between idealism, but then also seeing the results of his actions. Strictly following theory and chivalric ideals, and in this book we see how that creates many counterintuitive effects, such as when he frees the chain gang who ended up robbing him because he didn't realize the full extent to what he was doing. And oftentimes, and this could apply to you too as well, oftentimes that like we look up to many business leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, athletes, whoever, and instead of modeling our own lives to what we want, we model our lives to what they want. And in return, we kind of we put ourselves in a lot of disarray, and we ended up doing things that we don't enjoy. Therefore, I personally think that one should learn theory and application kind of simultaneously, just as I think that the application will provide motivation for the theory, and the theory is just the coolness for the application. Dulcinea del Toboso is also a really great metaphor for our dreams and desires and hopes and goals that sometimes are often unattainable because they're not grounded in reality. The mistake Don Quixote makes is that, first of all, he doesn't even meet her. He doesn't even know that this Dulcinea del Toboso exists. First of all, she doesn't. Spoiler alert. It's not really a big spoiler, but she doesn't exist. And him not having his motivation grounded in reality kind of will bite back at him later at the end of the book. The point is that we need to ground our goals in reality. Understand what we're capable of and just move forward. If there's one thing I didn't like about this long-ass book is that sometimes Cervantes goes off on tangents that are like pretty long, and that's just the result of it being a 1,000-page book. And sometimes it gets annoying, but you learn to deal with it. I think that anybody who likes, in general, satire, fantasy, like shared fantasy, or any kind of fantasy fiction, or even cosplayers, people trying to dress up as their favorite characters, I think all those types of people would love this book. Despite its archaic language, it still was an amazing read. And it's probably one of my favorite books of all time. Now, obviously, this is not an overnight read. It's not even a 1-a-week read. This took me 2.5 months while reading like 20-30 pages a night on my own. And that's how I think you should approach this. Think of it as a small habit that you do, but you gotta keep doing it every single day. You're gonna run into plenty of days where you're tired, exhausted, you have absolutely no motivation or energy to read this. On those days, you still read. Read it, even if it's 5 pages, even if it's 2 pages, that's still progress. And that's a really important thing to know. Consistency is always the most important thing when reading these books. How many words per minute you read, or pages per minute, or speed reading, all that doesn't really matter. What matters is you just consistently read at your own pace. Now, you also need to make sure that you keep up a decent pace, because long books are they're month-long marathons to go through. And as you pick up on insightful ideas like the many I've seen here, please share them with the people around you. Share them with your friends. Share them with your coworkers. Share them with your share them with your classmates. Share them with your family. Share them on an online forum or a YouTube video. It appears I've broken the fourth wall. But in any way that you'd like, please share the ideas of the books you read, and you will find so much more fulfillment out of them. And that's probably the most important piece of advice I can give, as that's what's going to make you a more interesting person. You're going to get more out of life in general, and you're going to have a much happier time on this planet. That is why and how I read long books.